He stood there with pruning shears, cutting my internet cable with a satisfied smirk on his face. That single snip cost me a $200,000 client contract. The very next day, I orchestrated my revenge. 300 hungry people crashed his door, expecting a free barbecue he never announced. What would you do if your neighbor deliberately destroyed your livelihood with a pair of garden shears? I'm a 38-year-old software developer who relies entirely on my home internet connection to support myself. 3 years ago, I bought a modest house in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood where most residents are friendly and respectful, except for Walter Thompson at 50. Walter considers himself the unofficial neighborhood sheriff. He moved here 20 years ago when the development was new and has resisted every change since. No architectural updates, no modern landscaping, and especially no visible technology. For Walter, satellite dishes are eyesores, security cameras are invasions of privacy, and fiber optic cables are turning our dignified community into a tacky tech park. Most neighbors politely tolerate Walter's crusade against progress. We nod at his presentations during community meetings, accept his typed violation notices with forced smiles, and ignore his passive-aggressive comments about our modern lifestyle choices. That changed when I finally challenged his authority with something he couldn't intimidate: facts. Last month, Walter posted an alarming announcement on our community board: emergency meeting, addressing modernization threatening neighborhood tradition and character. Curious and slightly concerned, 30 neighbors gathered at our community center that Wednesday evening. Walter arrived with a leather-bound portfolio and a grave expression, passing out meticulously typed reports listing community violations requiring immediate corrective action. I scanned the list, surprised to find my home featured prominently: unsightly internet cables destroying visual aesthetic along property line, router placement creating technological disruption visible from street, and, most bizarrely, excessive Wi-Fi signals interfering with neighborhood electrical harmony. When Walter opened the floor for questions, the room fell uncomfortably silent. Most neighbors avoided eye contact, unwilling to challenge Walter's self-appointed authority. I raised my hand. "Walter, I appreciate your concern for our community's appearance," I began carefully, "but some of these technical claims aren't factually accurate. Wi-Fi signals are radio waves that can't be seen and don't interfere with neighborhood electrical harmony or property values." The room tensed. Walter's face tightened as I continued. "The fiber optic installation you're concerned about was unanimously approved by the City Council after environmental and aesthetic review," I explained, showing the permits on my phone. "These cables actually reduced visible wiring by 60% compared to the previous infrastructure." Several neighbors nodded, visibly relieved someone had finally spoken up. "Furthermore, the property value concern isn't supported by real estate data," I continued. "According to the county assessor's report from last quarter, homes with fiber optic connections actually command a 4 to 8% premium in our area." Mrs. Abernathy, our 82-year-old neighborhood matriarch whom everyone respected, chuckled. "That sounds right. When they installed my internet last year, my grandson said my house was finally worth something." The room erupted in laughter, everyone except Walter, whose face had flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "Well, I've done extensive research," he stuttered. "I'm sure you have," I replied respectfully, "and we all appreciate your dedication to our community. I'm simply clarifying that these specific technical concerns aren't supported by current data." As the meeting shifted to other topics, Walter sat silently, his eyes fixed on me with unmistakable hostility. As neighbors filed out afterward, he brushed past me with a barely audible mutter: "Some people learn respect the hard way." I thought little of it at the time. That was my first mistake. The next morning, after the neighborhood meeting, I woke early to prepare for my important presentation. As I made coffee, I noticed Walter through my kitchen window, walking casually past my house with something in his hand. The very next morning brought a crucial opportunity. After 6 months of development work, I was presenting my software solution to MedCorp Industries, a potential $200,000 contract that would secure my business for the next year. At 9:32 a.m., mid-presentation, my screen froze. "Connection lost" flashed across my monitor. Panic surged through me. "Just a momentary technical issue," I assured the 5 executives on the call. "I'll reconnect immediately." But restarting my router did nothing. My phone showed no Wi-Fi connection either. Something was seriously wrong. After 15 excruciating minutes of failed troubleshooting while clients waited, I had to reschedule the presentation, watching my professional credibility dissolve with each apologetic email. My internet provider could only offer a Thursday appointment, 48 critical hours away, which meant missed deadlines, rescheduled meetings, and explaining to clients why the reliable professional they hired suddenly couldn't deliver. When the technician finally arrived, he inspected my system before checking the external connection point. "Sir," he called from beside my house, "you need to see this." He pointed to where my cable entered the junction box. The line wasn't frayed or weather damaged. It was deliberately cut with a clean diagonal slice. "This was done with sharp tools," he said, "probably garden shears or pruners. This wasn't accidental damage." A chill ran through me as Walter's parting comment echoed in my mind. Some people learn respect the hard way. That evening, I reviewed my security camera footage from that morning. There it was. At 7:15 a.m., Walter passing my junction box, stopping briefly, looking around to ensure no witnesses, then leaning down with pruning shears clearly visible in his hand. The footage captured in perfect detail as he positioned the shears around my cable and made a deliberate diagonal cut, the exact scene depicted in security footage I would later share. He stood back to admire his handiwork before walking away with a satisfied smile. The MedCorp contract was lost. "We need partners with reliable infrastructure," the email explained. "While we understand technical difficulties occur, this raises concerns about your operational stability." In one snip, Walter had cost me $200,000 and damaged my professional reputation, all because I had politely contradicted him at a neighborhood meeting. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the $200,000, though that loss was devastating. It was the violation of my home, my security, my means to provide for myself. My father had worked 3 jobs to put me through computer science school, believing technology would give me opportunities he never had. "The future is digital, son," he'd say. Now, a man who feared that future had reached into my home and pulled those opportunities away with garden shears. Something primal and protective awakened in me. This wasn't just about an internet cable anymore. That evening, while reviewing the security footage, I noticed something Walter hadn't considered. My doorbell camera had captured him practicing his speech before the neighborhood meeting, a rehearsed monologue where he'd specifically mentioned making examples of those who challenge authority. This wasn't just about my cable. This was premeditated. As I saved this additional evidence to a secure cloud location, a plan began forming in my mind. Walter thought he'd won, but he'd actually just provided me with everything I needed for what came next. Sometimes, karma needs a little strategic assistance. I considered my options carefully. Filing a police report was possible, but the grainy footage might not be convincing enough for criminal charges. Confronting Walter directly risked escalating the situation unpredictably. Instead, I decided to research Walter more thoroughly, searching for leverage. Public records and social media revealed fascinating insights into what drove him. Walter wasn't merely annoyed by technology, he was fighting existential obsolescence. His LinkedIn page revealed he'd spent 25 years mastering traditional printing craftsmanship before digital technology eliminated his position. "Technology isn't just changing our neighborhood," he'd written in a community forum. "It's erasing our history. We're losing the human element." The fiber optic cables weren't the enemy. Invisibility in a rapidly changing world was what terrified him. Yet, despite this insight, his actions remained inexcusable. Understanding someone's pain doesn't justify them inflicting it on others. My livelihood depended on that internet connection just as surely as his father's generation had depended on telephone lines for their businesses. What Walter failed to recognize was that technology didn't replace community, it transformed how communities connect. The same cables he resented were what allowed elderly residents to video chat with grandchildren across the country, helped working parents stay employed while raising families, and enabled medical consultations for those with mobility challenges. His social media was filled with self-congratulatory posts about his service to the neighborhood. He constantly positioned himself as indispensable to community welfare, documenting every minor contribution with photos and exaggerated descriptions. What Walter craved wasn't actually control, it was recognition and relevance. He wanted to be seen as the neighborhood's essential pillar, respected and appreciated for his contributions in a world where he increasingly felt sidelined. That's when inspiration struck. If recognition was Walter's currency, that's exactly where he was most vulnerable. I called my cousin Michael, a corporate attorney who specializes in property disputes. Hypothetically, I asked, what legal ramifications exist for someone deliberately cutting residential telecommunications lines? Potentially serious, Michael replied. Vandalism, criminal mischief, possibly even federal charges since telecommunications are protected infrastructure. Damages could include lost income, repair costs, and business disruption. Why? I explained the situation. Document everything, Michael advised, but whatever you're planning beyond that, I honestly don't want to know. I smiled. I wouldn't dream of doing anything illegal. Just educational. This calls for immediate action, I told myself. Tomorrow, Walter learns what happens when you cut someone's connection. My plan required strategic precision. I worked through the night designing a professional-looking digital flyer. Neighborhood Appreciation Barbecue. This Saturday, 1 p.m. free food, drinks, and community celebration hosted by Walter Thompson at 1423 Willow Creek Drive. Everyone welcome. A special community announcement will be made at 1:30 p.m. sharp. I printed 200 copies on high-quality paper with the Neighborhood Association's header, an organization Walter frequently claimed to represent despite holding no official position. Phase 1. Distribution. I placed flyers in mailboxes throughout our neighborhood and 3 adjacent communities. I posted them on community bulletin boards, local shops, the community center, and even the nearby senior living facility where many residents had family in our neighborhood. Phase 2. Digital reach. I created temporary accounts on neighborhood apps and local Facebook groups, sharing the event widely, but carefully covering my digital tracks. Phase 3. The masterstroke. I hired Marcus, an aspiring actor from the local theater, paying him $300 to deliver a perfectly timed performance. Your only job, I explained, showing him the footage of Walter cutting my cable, is to deliver the speech at exactly 1:30 p.m., then walk away. You'll never mention me, or how you learned this information. Marcus reviewed my script. This guy deliberately cut your internet and cost you a major contract? Exactly. Consider it done, Marcus said. Some lessons need to be theatrical to stick. The plan was set. Tomorrow, just one day after he cut my cable, Walter would face 300 hungry people at his door expecting the free barbecue he never announced. The symmetry was perfect. One day he cut my connection to the world, and the very next day, I'd bring the world to his doorstep. Word spread quickly. The combination of human nature and the promise of free food proved irresistible. By Friday, Walter's generous barbecue had become the talk of the neighborhood. Shopping at our local market, I overheard Mrs. Abernathy discussing it with the cashier. Walter Thompson hosting a community barbecue? That's certainly unexpected, she said. In 20 years, he's never so much as offered a neighbor a cup of sugar. I'm curious what prompted this sudden generosity. Will you be attending? The cashier asked. Wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Abernathy replied with a knowing smile. When someone shows you a new side of themselves, you pay attention. That afternoon, I spotted Walter in his front yard, meticulously edging his lawn with the same pruning shears he'd used on my cable. He appeared completely unaware of what awaited him the next day. As twilight fell, cars drove slowly past his house, curious neighbors scoping out the location of tomorrow's gathering, wondering where Walter would set up the grills and tables for his suddenly announced community event. The neighborhood buzz was building exactly as I'd hoped, setting the stage for the crowd of 300 that would arrive the next day. I slept soundly that night for the first time since losing my contract. The scale of what was coming gave me a certain peace, not revenge, justice. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, 75 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny with a light breeze, ideal for a neighborhood barbecue. At 12:30 p.m., I positioned myself strategically at the coffee shop across from Walter's house, ordering an Americano and finding a window seat with an unobstructed view of his property. 12:45 p.m. The Thompsons arrived first, a family of four bearing a homemade apple pie. Walter opened his door with visible confusion as they thanked him for hosting the community event. From my vantage point, I could see his bewildered expression as he tried to understand what they were talking about. 12:52 p.m. Three more families appeared, lawn chairs and coolers in hand. Walter stepped fully onto his porch, looking increasingly concerned. 12:58 p.m. The Johnsons arrived with their elderly mother in a wheelchair. "We're so grateful you're doing this, Walter," Mrs. Johnson called out. "Mom doesn't get many opportunities to socialize with the community." 1:05 p.m. 27 people now populated Walter's immaculately maintained front yard. No barbecue equipment was visible, no tables, no food, no preparations of any kind. "There must be some mistake," Walter called out, his voice strained above the cheerful chatter. 1:15 p.m. The crowd swelled to 50. Children played tag across Walter's meticulously maintained lawn while adults mingled expectantly. Walter's increasingly frantic explanations were drowned out by the growing commotion. 1:20 p.m. Over 300 people now filled Walter's property and spilled onto adjacent lawns. Cars lined both sides of the street for nearly half a mile. The atmosphere was festive, expectant, a party waiting to begin. I had never imagined my plan would draw such an enormous crowd. "I never invited any of you," Walter shouted, face reddening. "This is trespassing. There is no barbecue." But his protests were overwhelmed by arriving guests, cheerful conversations, and children's laughter. 1:25 p.m. The crowd continued growing. Several community leaders arrived, the actual neighborhood association president, 2 city council members, and even a local news reporter who'd heard about this generous community event. Walter's face drained of color as the reporter approached with a cameraman. "Mr. Thompson, what a wonderful initiative. Would you share what inspired you to host this community appreciation event?" Before Walter could respond, a car horn announced Marcus's arrival. Marcus stepped out wearing a crisp button-down shirt and carrying a portable microphone. With natural charisma, he climbed Walter's porch steps and raised his hands for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The crowd quieted. The reporter turned her camera toward Marcus. "First, I want to thank you all for coming to this community gathering, and special thanks to our host, Mr. Walter Thompson." Confused applause followed. Walter tried to interrupt, but Marcus smoothly continued. "Community is built on 3 essential pillars: respect, consideration, and, most importantly, connection." Marcus paused meaningfully, looking directly at Walter. When someone deliberately severs that connection, it affects not just one person, but ripples throughout the entire neighborhood. The crowd listened transfixed as Marcus continued. "Did you know that just yesterday morning, someone in this very neighborhood took pruning shears to their neighbor's internet cable? A neighbor who works from home and depends on that connection for their livelihood. A neighbor who had done nothing except politely disagree at a community meeting." Gasps spread through the crowd. Phone cameras rose to record. The news reporter edged closer. "That's right," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the now silent gathering. "Someone decided their personal offense was worth destroying another person's ability to work, communicate, and contribute to this community." All eyes turned to Walter, whose expression transformed from outrage to dawning horror. "So today," Marcus announced, "we're not actually here for a barbecue. We're here to recognize what happens when someone believes they can cut connections without consequences. Security camera footage doesn't lie, Mr. Thompson." Marcus pulled out his phone and displayed an enlarged still image from my security camera. Walter, pruning shears in hand, bent over my junction box. "I think we've all learned something valuable today." With that, Marcus stepped down and walked away, his message delivered perfectly. The crowd's reaction was immediate and powerful. Stunned silence gave way to uncomfortable murmuring, then outright disapproval directed at Walter. Mrs. Abernathy approached him first. "I've known you for 20 years, Walter. Never thought you'd stoop to vandalism over a simple disagreement." Deeply disappointed, the neighborhood association president shook his head. "Damaging telecommunications infrastructure is a federal offense, Walter. Your neighbor would be within his rights to press charges." The reporter approached, microphone extended. "Mr. Thompson, would you care to comment on these allegations? Was this gathering organized to expose your actions?" Walter stood speechless, his carefully constructed facade of neighborhood authority crumbling before the community he'd sought to control.